Welcome back to Biology with Mrs. Evans. Today we're going to be looking at relationships. So back in Unit 4, we learned about the symbiosis theory, how eukaryotes came to be by a larger prokaryote eating a smaller one. Symbiosis is the relationship between two organisms. There are three main types that you need to know. There are actually more types, but you only need to know these three types. The first one is mutualism, the second one is parasitism, and the third one is commensalism. You're probably most familiar with parasitism because you've probably had it at some point in your life. An example of a tick being on a human, or a leech on a human, or a flea on a dog. Mutualism means both organisms benefit, and I'll show you two examples of that. And then commensalism is where one benefits and the other one is unaffected. So an example of mutualism is a bee on a flower. Both of the organisms are going to be benefited. The flower is going to get pollinated by the bee traveling from flower to flower, and the bee is going to get food from the flowers. Another example is the sea anemone and the clownfish. The clownfish gets protection from its predators because the sea anemone stings other organisms, but the clownfish is unaffected by its stings, and the sea anemone gets food that may be brought to the sea anemone by the clownfish coming in. Parasitism, like I said, an example is a tick on a human. One is benefited, the other one is harmed. Another example is a leech on a human. Another example is poison ivy on another plant because it starts to choke it out. Commensalism, one organism benefits and the other is unaffected. What you see pictured is an epiphyte. It's a plant that grows in a tree. The tree is not affected. It's just basically giving the epiphyte a closer exposure to basically the sunlight. So another example is a barnacle in a whale. The whale gives the barnacle movement because barnacles, once they're attached, they can no longer move. So the barnacle attaches to basically the underside of the mouth of the whale, and the whale is not affected by it, doesn't harm it, but the barnacle gets basically the benefit of movement, so it has more access to food. All right, disturbances in a community. All right, ecological succession. What that is it's a prediction of how a ecosystem is going to basically succeed. All right, after a disturbance, a community tends to recover in a specific pattern. There are two types of ecological succession. All right, so the first one is primary succession. Primary succession means it begins with bare rock. There's nothing that has there's nothing that has been there before. All right, usually it's where glaciers have receded and opened up a new area. A new island has formed. A volcanic eruption can cause primary succession to occur, which means that basically that it has wiped out everything in front of it and it has left nothing but bare rock present. All right, pioneer species. The first species to colonize an area is what is known as a pioneer species. These are typically lichens. Lichens, again, is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an autotroph, such as algae or a plant. All right, it is capable of breaking down bare rock into soil. It basically releases digestive enzymes around it because what it will then do is the fungus part will absorb the nutrients, but the enzymes break down the rock, forming soil. So lichens, the best way to remember that, there's a joke that says Freddy fungus and Alice algae are living together and they are liking it. Right, so lichens is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an autotroph such as algae or a plant. And you can see here the lichen is the yellow areas on the bare rock, and it's already starting to break down the rock to form soil. Once soil is created and the soil is deep enough, grasses can start growing. All right, and then once grasses are there, they start to die off and the soil gets deeper and allows shrubs to come in. All right, and then shrubs do the same thing. They die off and they cause the soil to get deeper and deeper. Once the soil is deep enough, eventually trees are going to form, and they're going to follow this predictable pattern. All right, for primary succession, here's a picture of it. You have the bare rock, and then you have the lichens coming in, moving in. shows the small annual plants coming in. Then you have your perennials. Those are ones that come back every year. And then you have your shrubs, your evergreens usually typically come in, and then you reach your climax community. And the climax community is whatever it is for that area. For Virginia, our climax community is when we have a deciduous forest present. When I was in college, I actually worked with the National Forest Service, and we basically documented the succession of an area of land that they had basically set aside to see what the rate of succession is for Virginia, for a piece of land that they set aside from basically Bull Run National Forest Service, where the battlefields were, and we went out and we tracked how many of the evergreens were in a square, and I'll talk about how that works later. The second type of succession is secondary succession. It begins with soil rather than rock, so it begins after some type of natural disaster, forest fire, like volcanic eruption, or whatever that has totally wiped out the area, but has left the soil intact. If the soil is there, then the succession would be the grasses are going to come in, followed by shrubs, followed by the evergreens, followed by the climax community. And again, the climax community depends on what the biome is. For us here in Virginia, it's when we start to have hardwoods such as oak, hickory, walnut trees, and things like that. For a desert, it's going to be when you have cactus come in. All right, so the climax community is dependent upon what the biome is. So this shows you secondary succession. So you have a disturbance, in this case it's the fire, but it left soil intact. So then you have your annual plants. All right, those are the ones that come back, or they only live for 1 to 2 years. And you have your grasses and your perennials. Those are the ones that come back every year. And then you have your grasses, shrubs, pines, young oak, and like I said, you have your evergreens move in. And then for Virginia, our mature stage is oak and hickory forest. All right, and it depends on what type of biome it is as well. All right, when does succession stop? Succession stops when the development ends with the climax community. That is the end for that area. So for us, like I mentioned, for Virginia, the climax community is a deciduous forest. For a desert, it would be when cactus are present. So again, you need to know for Virginia, the deciduous forest climax community is when we have hardwood trees. That's when oak, hickory, and other trees are present.